Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, Amy, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Mark. It's good to be with you today.
Likewise. I'm sitting here looking out my window, and there's snow in the mountains, and it's 38 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, if anybody from non-American audience is listening. Where are you at, and how's the weather right now?
Yes. So I'm in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, and it is finally beginning to feel like winter may be coming today. It is wintry with a little bit of soggy rain and threatening of lower temperatures coming up soon. So we're going to say
lower temperatures. What do you mean by lower temperatures? Because to me, 39, that's getting pretty low. But What are you at?
Yeah. Well, we've had super unusual weather, meaning that it's been like in the 70s for the past couple weeks. Yeah, and then
I'm on my way.
Right, come down, come visit us. But yeah, it's about to become like in the 50s, which is more normal for this time of year here. You know, sweater weather, get your fire going, all that fun stuff.
50 sounds so cozy to me right now. That's awesome.
I hear you.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. You have got a tremendous amount of experience in sales and leading sales teams. And I want to talk to you about building high trust teams and why that's important. Also want to talk about, the role that motivation plays in both individuals and in teams in terms of, staying focused and staying motivated. But before we do that, could you maybe talk a little bit about, because, you've worked in high profile positions with companies like ADP and Salesforce. And I'm sure you probably also have some work as an individual contributor. Now you're working as a fractional CRO. So could you talk a little bit about your background and why you decided to move more into a fractional CRO type of situation?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And thanks for the chance to tell my story, Mark. So, I've spent, I can't believe it, almost 25 years in technology sales. And just like most every good salesperson and leader, I came into sales by accident. I feel like sales found me. I went from being a pre-med major at the University of Wyoming to deciding to scrap that idea because I could not stomach the thought of however many more years of school and I don't know, whatever small fortune I was going to spend on grad school for med school. And I said, you know what? I'm going to move to Atlanta. I had a job with a nonprofit. It said it was in marketing, but let's face it, it was in sales. So I started my career there. And along the way, I found myself in some really, I got lucky a lot of times. I put my head down, I worked hard, and it turned out that, against, kind of all odds and my own desire, I happened to be talented at selling. And when I was growing up in my selling career, I found myself naturally pulled into leadership. I was constantly coaching and helping support my teammates around me. And I got my first formal leadership role at a company called OneSource Virtual, which was a Workday partner. So that began my leadership journey about 10 years ago. And I kept growing into bigger and bigger responsibility, more and more revenue, making a ton of mistakes along the way, because just like most sales leaders in their journey, I didn't have a lot of training. I just was kind of thrown in the deep end and figured it out.
It's funny because a lot of times the selection process for a sales leader is, they're a successful salesperson.
Yes.
And oftentimes the traits that make somebody a very successful lone wolf salesperson are almost the opposite traits you need to be a sales leader. So, and I've seen it time and time again where, just as you said, people are selected and then thrown into the spot without really any real formal training.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's still happening yet today, and some of it is that there's an element of don't know what you don't know. Since nobody received training, usually as a sales leader, they don't know how to create it for others. And so, you learn the hard way, which is what I did. And in that journey, I think one of the things that I really arrived at was my own leadership style, my own leadership philosophy, and what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I would really say that the biggest thing that does work for me is just being myself. Right. And that's just so basic. But when you're learning how to do something, it's so natural and normal to try to model what you're doing off of somebody else that you've seen do it. And that can work for a while to kind of get some basics down. You've got to always sprinkle in like your own style and your own approach. And that's what I attribute my success to. Like things really kind of turned a corner for me in my leadership when I first became a leader, when I decided I wanted to be the leader that I always wanted to have. And
so let's talk about that a second. Talk about a couple of the mistakes you made when you're making that transition into a leadership role, and then talk about how you were able to take a step back and say, those are mistakes. I want to do it my way, and then talk about some of the things that you started to do to make it yours.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the first mistakes I made was, typically, like most sales leaders, and I was no exception, I was promoted to take over a team of my peers. And I think one of the first mistakes I made was not really setting the boundaries clearly enough about the fact that, yes, I always supported them and cared about them as individuals, and that would never change. However, I now had a bigger responsibility to not be their buddy. And not just that we couldn't be friendly, but I had to be able to make decisions, and sometimes unpopular ones, and have my team understand that. And most importantly, I had to earn their respect. I think one of the things that I first made mistake on was believing that, just because I had the title, that somehow permitted me to have access to people's respect without earning it first. And I did some dumb stuff. I micromanaged people, right? I did some of these like completely normal mistakes that first time leaders make.
I'm a manager now. I got to do management stuff. And so where's those TPS reports,
How am I going to add value, right?
Right.
How am I going to add value? I mean, I will never forget, I was with this absolute rock star of a saleswoman who was one of the top performers, top earners at the company when I first began leading. And she was taking over my old territory. And we go into these sales calls together, and she's new to the company. And so I'm helping her learn training, feeling like I'm doing such a great job training her. And we get out of probably would have been maybe our fourth or fifth prospect call after she'd been with the company for a couple months. And we walked out of the meeting. She looked at me and she said, "I thought you told me you were going to let me lead the meeting." And I was like, "Oh, ow, I did that, didn't I?" And she said, "Yeah, you did." And I said, "Okay, thanks for telling me." Right? Like those things.
And that's a completely human kind of reaction, because I think we've all been there where you want everything to be perfect in front of the customer, and you've been down had this conversation, for years. And so it's natural, you just take the lead. But, and salespeople like to have autonomy, and they like to have to be the leader, right? So it's hard to step back, but it's really nice that she felt comfortable enough to tell you.
Well, that says more about her than it did about me, I think. At the time, so, the one thing that I'll say is that I think for leaders is like figuring out how do you drive value in everything that you do, and specifically when you're engaging with prospects, because, I grew up, at ADP where, it was really kind of an expectation that if you brought a leader in, they kind of frowned on it. Like they thought, what, you can't close the deal yourself? It was weird. And this might have just been old school culture that was still kind of hanging around. I'm sure things have majorly changed in the many years since I've been there, but that was kind of the attitude at the time. And also we, as sales reps, we sort of definitely had this fear that we brought our leaders in, they were going to mess up the deal for us, because some of us had horror stories of that happening. And so some of it was just like figuring out like, what's my role here? And how to step into that role. And I think that's one of the things that as a sales new sales leader that nobody really probably talks about much. They talk about all these glossy business book topics. They don't talk about the things that really matter, like what's your role you're going to play in a sales call, right? And
So
play it
where
again.
do you, yeah, and so you made that transition. So what areas do you find that you can bring value in a sales call?
Well, I think the one of the main things is typically being a little bit removed from the day to day on a sales process helps me a lot, because that just gives me a little better perspective. I'm not so close. Believe it or not, and this always kind of floored me. I'm like, hey, I'm the same person, but folks like to talk to people who have a higher up title, makes them feel that we care more. And so just by nature of having a authority by title, oftentimes I can bridge a gap in relationship and connection with the person on the other side of the table from just a shared understanding and a respect of leadership of, hey, we both are running businesses here. And the credibility of how long we've been doing these things together really, I think, kind of can lend to a better trust in the conversation. So, when I think about my role, it's to, number one, help them with strategy and help them see things they're not seeing. And number two, on the customer side, be a sponsor for the customer, and really act as a buck stops with me kind of leader for them, where, they have my cell phone. It's my personal cell phone is my work cell phone. People would probably tell me that that's not healthy balance, but it's worked for me for all this time. So I'm sticking with it. And I've given it to my customers. I've given it to leaders. And you know what? There's been times when they had to call me, and I was so glad they did, because I was the one that dealt with the problems instead of the sales, my sales individual contributor, my sales rep, because I want my sales rep out there selling. If there's a problem because of, I don't know, insert customer service, whatever, we screwed up on on something, I'll deal with that, and I'll rally my leaders to take care of that. And I see that as part of my role, is to help fix those kinds of things, especially when it gets escalated to me by the customer.
Totally agree. The best boss I ever had was the CEO of a company. I was reporting to her, and she had this policy, Mark. She was pretty high profile in that industry. She said, just use me to get access to whoever you want to talk to.
Oh, yeah.
And I will be there in person or virtually or whatever you need. I'll do that. And then the other thing that she would do is, what resources do you need to be successful? She very, very little sales coaching. I mean, it was basically, I'm a resource. She was a resource for me and our team, right? Because it was a regional team. And she just, it didn't matter who in our prospect or customer we were meeting with, if we wanted her to be involved. Because a lot of times, like you said, the prospects or customers, they feel good to meet somebody who has a little more authority. They feel like, hey, you are respecting or appreciating this opportunity. You're taking it seriously. And it didn't matter how big the deal was, who, whatever. She just was very, very supportive of the entire team, which it was huge. And I learned a lot from that as well.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm always interested in empowering my team. I'm not there to do their work for them. That takes away from them and their growth and their experience and their contribution. But there's certain things I do acknowledge that it's better if I do it. And oh my gosh, I think one of the things, I see a lot of this on LinkedIn. Everybody's talking about cold email all the time, which kind of cracks me up. I'm like, they act like this is new. We've been selling this way for forever. But what I got good at doing for my teams and with my teams and giving them access, what I'd say, hey, if there's a leader that we're trying to get a meeting with, write the email for me. I'll write the old ghost
Yeah.
email tactic, write the email for me. Give me everything I need to send this email on your behalf. I'll tweak it. I'll make it mine. I'll reach out on LinkedIn. I'll do as many touches as you would do, getting a hold of this individual. And I tell you what, and it's not because I had some kind of special sauce, Mark. I'm sure it works in your world too. I was able to get the meeting 90% of the time,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
And not because I'm super special. It's just, that extra level of, hey, I don't care that this is a relatively small deal for my company. This rep is trying to make quota this month. Mm-hmm. And I'm about this individual's success. I'm about the team's success. And I'm not above calling anybody anywhere at any time to do it, help in any way I can. Yeah.
That's awesome. Let me ask you though, I mean, sometimes when you're leading a team though, you could have issues. Okay. Not just that they require your support, but maybe you're in a meeting, and you see, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a different way of handling that. Maybe, so sometimes you do need to do a little bit of coaching, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes the coaching, is accepted and well received, and sometimes it's not. And maybe the performance, isn't where it needs to be. And you need to kind of help them figure out how are they going to get back on target, or if they are going to get back on target. So let's talk about this.
Yeah.
When you spot an area for improvement, how do you put your coach hat on and deal with that? And then if there is no improvement, or the performance is lacking, how do you kind of manage that process? Because that's all important too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to go back a little bit, Mark, because you opened with high trust teams. So, nobody will hear a word you say if they don't believe that you care about them. So whether that's good or bad or neutral, I really aim to earn the trust of every individual on my team. And one of the ways that I evolved my leadership as I got greater span of control, because when I left Salesforce, I was running a $200 million customer portfolio responsible for $35 million revenue add ARR each year, customer retention numbers that were, huge, high, and a team of about, 40 to 50 individual sellers and a leadership team of 6 direct reports. So what I did, with my directs, in regard to performance is I started where you begin, which was, I got to know I made it a point, and it was my business to get to know each of my directs individually. Mm-hmm. So I actually got an exercise that is super, anybody could do it, that helps build trust. It takes 2 hours, a Zoom account or whatever your video call of choice is, and a blank sheet of paper. And the exercise is you get on the meeting with everybody. You tell them what it's going to be. It's going to be a team building. And what we're going to do is have a chance to learn about each other. And on the blank sheet of paper, you take 15 minutes or 10 or however long it takes everybody to complete. And the idea is that you draw a map of your life and your experiences, the main experiences of your life, from, where you were born, where you grew up, where you went to school, and all the things that kind of happen along the way, the major events that happen along the way that brought you to where you are today. And I'll never forget doing this with my team for the very first time. And, I was excited about it. And then when I started doing it, I got really nervous, Mark. And it came time and it wouldn't surprise you, like it was a small enough group on my team where we could share with the group. When you write out in your map, you turn around and you share your story with everybody on the call. And you can share to the level of comfort that you have of sharing.
Right.
Well, I was with Salesforce and they are sharers there. Okay. So even on the sales team, these are hard-nosed A players like, mm-hmm. Group Presidents Club, leaderboard people. And they shared these stories of of triumph and setback and resilience and heartbreak and grief and illness and just all these things that you would never know about somebody if you didn't have like years maybe to get to know them. In 2 hours, we learned this about each other. And I'll never forget when I had to tell mine, I was like, oh, suddenly I was sweating. I was hot. I was nervous. It was like, I had to get really vulnerable with my team and like really share who I was with them. And you know what? That's exactly what they wanted from me. So that practice became a standard practice on my teams. And so my leaders did it with their teams. I did skip levels to once a quarter with every individual seller on my team. So the goal for me was, you know, I could only manage and lead these folks if they knew that I knew who they were. I knew what their life was about. I knew what their personal goals were, and I knew what their professional goals were. So when you start from that basis, and it requires a ton of effort to do it. The lazy thing to do is to just jump right in and say, hey, we're running a sales number and assume that everybody's like on board with it. It takes more time, but that time you spend at the beginning saves you time later. Because when it comes time for a coaching call to happen or performance issues to be addressed, you know, the conversation looks like, you know, me speaking with the individual and saying, hey, Mark, this last quarter was a goose egg for you. I know that's not what you want. I know that's not what you're about. That's not what you told me when we met 2 months ago, what have you. What's going on in your life? What's happening, right? And I would learn what's going on. There's either something or there's not something. And there's sometimes it's just not a right fit for folks. And that's totally cool, right? Like, hey, not everybody wants to hang around whatever job they're in for forever. Maybe, you know, they're just not feeling it. And so it's time to move on. But I find, you know, coaching begins with relationship. And then the favorite thing I like to do is, you know, when I see something that needs to be corrected, like I don't mess around, I do it right away. I used to mess around when I was younger. I don't do that anymore. So I don't wait. I'm not afraid, because the way I've learned to view feedback is people say it's a gift. It's only a gift if it's really coming from the heart, but it's a gift if the reason you're sharing it is that you genuinely care about this person. You care about the results for the team, and you're trying to help them be a better player, a better craftsperson at what they're doing. And so I would give my feedback right away. And if folks didn't want to correct it or they didn't want to hear it, then we were having a different kind of conversation. And that's the way I would position it with them. You know, anybody can screw up once. Anybody can even screw up twice. If you get to a third screw up, because I don't even think, you know, it's a one strike and you're out, because that's not what life is like. But if you get to where somebody keeps making the same mistake over and over again, then you're having hey, this doesn't work, folks. This is not serving you. It's not serving the team, and we got to do something about it.
Well, I like the fact that what you talked about is building that relationship first, so that it's easier to have those conversations, and the communications would seem to be much more sincere. I oftentimes would give feedback and say, would it be okay if I shared my observations or some ideas with you?
For sure.
And basically I'll bundle them into two types. Observations, which you can take or leave. It's just, you know, cause I can't change who you are, how you are, what you do. I don't want to. I want you to be you, but this is just my thought. Okay. But then there are some observations where I'm like, no, from now on, you know, you're not going to say this in front of a customer. Okay. We are not going to apologize our way out of, you know, no, we're going to sell to our students, you know, whatever the example is. Right. But there are some that take it or leave it. This is just you know, and if you have observations that you'd like to share with me, that's awesome as well. But some of them, you're going to have to make this change. And usually that works. But, I'm wondering though, if we go back to the initial trust building exercise, and I was feeling vulnerable, like listening to you prepare for that. And I was thinking, like, if I did that, how deep would I go? Because in order for it to be, I guess, valuable, I have to be somewhat vulnerable.
100%.
And I'm wondering, and I've never asked this of anybody before, but since you do a podcast on women in sales leadership, let me ask you, do you think it's easier for, or I wouldn't say easier, or is it more common, or for a woman to lead that type of exercise compared to a man?
I couldn't
I'm
comment.
specifically talking about the vulnerability and communicating about our personal lives, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the data is out there, Mark, with regard to vulnerability and its connection to leadership and trust. You know, Brene Brown has written extensively on the topic. So, you know, I don't know. I was probably the only leader on my team to do that exercise. I talked about it with everybody. And then what was fascinating to me was half of my team were men. Actually, on that team, it was 3 men and a female and a lady. And the men all jumped right on board and like did this exercise with their teams after we did it together.
Oh, they did it with their, okay. So I was thinking, because it's the dynamic's different if they're just doing it with you, but if they turn around and did it with their team, it's the same exact dynamic. Yeah.
It is. And so I think, you know, I'm not sure. I can't really comment. Like, was it easier? I was scared out of my wits, because I'll tell you, one of the challenges of being a woman in leadership is that, you know, we've got to be better than the men are always. Like, we have to outperform. It's not just perform. Performed is not good enough. And that's how we all see it. We see ourselves as having to like do better than the guys, because that's kind of been our life experience of getting to this point, is like how we got here, is that we really were better. And so this, like, the standards we hold ourselves to are crazy high. And then what's worse is the tendency for women in leadership is like showing emotion or weakness has been completely like trained out of us as like, don't ever do that, because then you're going to get labeled of, oh, she's just an emotional woman. And, you know, whatever other ugly things people want to say that are tied to showing your emotions. Well, I tell you, some of the best and most passionate leaders that I've known are men, and they like wear their hearts on their sleeves, and their teams will run through freaking walls for them. And, you know, I think that's, and it's not about the leader, but it becomes about the bonding of the team. And that's what I really cared about. What was something I never anticipated, because this became a process that I've never failed to run. Anytime I had a new team or a new member of the team, like, we did this exercise together. And
I think it'd be a great exercise to do with anybody. I mean, God, just imagine.
Right?
like, let's cut through all the small talk and the chit chat. Let's get to know each other.
Yeah, like, really. I mean, and again, it's so what I found, though, was so fascinating. As my team got larger, I could be in less places. When I had 6 directs and I had a bigger business. And so what happened were these leaders were so bonded to each other. And they'd only probably met physically twice.
Wow.
But we did this exercise together, and they like knew each other's life story. And it created this like willingness to help each other out. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life, Mark. These leaders would be like, hey, I can't be on this sales call. Can you cover this for me? Do you know what there wasn't a discussion about? A split.
All right.
Nobody was
what's in it for me? What's in it for me?
Right?
It's like, no, man, we're all on the same team here.
They were all on the same team. They all cared about each other, and there was nobody taking advantage of anybody else. You know, the end of the quarter would come, and they decided to host office hours for the sellers who were new, where, you know, every day at 4:00, a leader would be on the call, and a seller could hop on and get any question answered or help needed with pricing, proposal, sales ops, deal desk review, blah, 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 all the things that big software organizations have that are called sales prevention departments. Right. My leaders did that for each other. It wasn't my idea.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, God,
brilliant.
That sounds like a really great team to be working with.
Well, I had a great team. I had a lot of great teams. They were one of them.
So talk a little bit more about some other things that you can do, not just as the leader, but maybe in terms of the team dynamic, in terms of, so that they can spontaneously come up and say, hey, we're going to have office hours, things like that. What can you do to kind of foster that environment of sharing?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the things is that I never try to show up with all the answers, ever. And most of the best ideas come from other brains, not mine. One of the skill sets I do bring to the table is I can spot people's talents and gifts, and I kind of know who's good at what and who to go to for when I have many of all the many things I don't do so well. But one of the things that I would do, I met with, we had a regular team every week call, and we had two. So I remember being annoyed at this, but I hate internal meetings, but you have to have them. So we had to have a forecast call. We had a forecast call, and then we had a leadership call. And the leadership calls where we discuss like new programs, issues, problems. How are we going to solve this? How are we going to solve? We don't have enough pipeline for next quarter. What are we going to do about it? Right? We would discuss these items together, and they were discussions. They weren't edicts from me. And I looked to my team. I would say, look, guys, we can either have me dictate the answer, or you guys come up with some ideas and we figure out which idea we like the best and go for it. Right. Mm-hmm. So I got them in the habit of showing up with ideas, and they got experience then being in my shoes, right? Which is exactly the training they wanted. They wanted to know how to get to the second leader level and to have that experience. And so, I developed those kinds of things. I listened, I asked questions, and I listened. And 9 times out of 10, it was their ideas that were running our business, not mine. Because they were close to the street.
Yeah. And oftentimes you're right, though, that people will go to a leader. It doesn't have to be just in sales. It could be in any role. And they'll go to the leader and say, hey, I have this problem. What should I do? But I think a more successful approach is what you just talked about. More sustainable is say, come to me with your problems, but also come to me with your ideas. Let's work this through, because and I've been in organizations where people, it took them a while. It took them 3 or 4 times through that, where they'd show up and I or another leader would say, so what would you do? What's your plan? And then they're like, wow, I can be empowered to kind of like help solve these problems. And it's a massive kind of accelerant in the team if you've got 10 people thinking versus 1 person. And like you said, they're on the front lines. They're closer to the problem oftentimes.
Yeah. The last thing I'll offer on that one, Mark, is that I really tried often to be the last one to speak.
That's hard for me.
It's challenging. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for everybody.
I have too much coffee. I'm just like, hey.
Look, when I ask a question, right, I try to really reserve any comment or, my feedback until like everybody has spoken. And I've even done such things as, and I got from a Brene Brown podcast that she did, where it was a question, and we were in a team and we were trying to decide, which 10 accounts we were going to place. We called our big bets. And on those big bets accounts, they got a ton more resources than the rest of them did, because we expected a huge return on those resources every year. And so we had kind of a pitch off of the sellers that would come and pitch each account to us, to the leaders and some of my strategy team on which ones should qualify. And it was, it was kind of, so we'd sit there after the pitch off and we'd all have ideas. And so what I chose to do to try to help the decision maker, so I didn't influence it too much, was I had everybody that was on the voting committee with me. I said, all right, we're going to secret ballot. You're going to sit down right now and write down what are your top 2 independently. Right. They couldn't hear anybody else's answer. And this is so simple stuff. Yeah. And then we shared what we each thought, so that there just wasn't this group influence on the discussion. And that's when I stole just straight from a Brene Brown podcast.
It's awesome. Yeah, because a lot of times people will follow the cue of the leader, and if the leader's like, "I think we should," and then it's like, "Well, I'm not going to
Well,
go against that. I'm not going to fight that
or
battle."
it becomes whoever speaks the loudest, whoever speaks first, and not necessarily the loudest and the first speaker is the best idea.
Totally agree. I'll talk about motivation because, okay, we're all human beings. We've got, I would say, kind of a finite amount of motivation and energy, and selling. You're probably going to get more no's than you're going to get yeses. So you could be an individual producer, frontline, part of a team, but you need to stay motivated and work through all the challenges. Talk a little bit about if you do any coaching related to that, but also in your role as a leader. You have to maintain that kind of what did they call that? The separation of you mentioned it earlier. You can't really be their friends. You're their leader, but not a friend, and sometimes that can be a little bit lonely. And so talk about the motivation for individual producers, and then later for leaders. How do you stay motivated?
So motivation is an internal job. It's a self job. But I think the role of leaders that people don't necessarily talk about anymore is actually encouragement. Mm-hmm. And believing in the team, believing in the individual. And everybody's going to have a bad day. They're going to have a bad week. They could have a bad month or bad quarter, bad year. Show me somebody who's been selling long enough. They've had a terrible year. And they could be a top performing President's Club, W-2 off the charts type of person. It'll happen. And I think what the thing is about motivation for me is, number one, what I learned later in my leadership is that I can't motivate anybody. They have to motivate themselves. But what I can do is remind them about what they say they want and who they say they are, and help them get perspective on that when they're feeling, discouraged or down, which is inevitable. It's going to happen. I do work hard to know when things are happening in my business. I can't be everywhere all the time. I knew when big presentations were happening, and I wasn't necessarily in the room, but you bet I was firing off a text or a Slack message to the salesperson and the leader separately saying, "You're going to nail it today. You've got this." Mm-hmm. You have prepared. You are going to hit this out of the park, right? I had a couple leaders that did that for me, and it is so funny. We are so strong and so powerful and so accomplished and so high performing, but oh my goodness, don't we all need a little bit of encouragement and somebody believing in us and reminding us how awesome we are, right?
Mm-hmm. So, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of that. And then, I communicated regularly with my teams, and I acknowledged wins a ton. Like there is never enough acknowledgement for success in my mind. I mean, the getting the meeting with the person you've been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months, it should be shouted from the rooftops, just as big as the contract getting signed, right? That is where the real work, it's like nobody sees. That's really challenging in this kind of work. And then, when I think about my own motivation, you know what? I have crummy days too. There are days I don't feel like doing it either. And, the choices kind of depends on what's on my schedule, and what's going on in my life. Like there are times when if I'm feeling really, really awful, I feel like it's my body telling me that I have to take a break and my mind telling me I have to take a break. And so, what I used to do was never take a break and just power through it and then be a grumpy jerk at the end of the day. Right?
Been there, done that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That nobody wants to be around, including me. I work hard now at managing my energy and managing my motivation. I follow a lot of different practices that help me do that. I exercise every other day. That's like a commitment I have to myself. I'm going to do a hardcore workout every other day. And then the days I'm not doing a hardcore workout, I'm at least going for a walk, or I'm doing yoga or stretching or something. I meditate for, it probably ends up being an hour every day, because I do like 10 minutes in the morning. And then I usually take a break in the afternoon around 2:30 or 3. And I lay down on the couch, and I have this app that I use, and I put on a 30-minute meditation. And that slowdown allows me to come back for another 2 or 3 hours and be fully charged up and ready to rock. Again, I used to work through that stuff, and then I'd be so depleted at the end of the day and, grumpy and unhappy. And I could, you find a way to recharge one way or the other, whether it's healthy or not. And so that's like, I think to me, motivation is about creating habits of performance. And then reminding myself, I do have a journal, somewhere over here, where it's like a hard copy thing, where I've written down, look, these are my goals for the year. This is what I'm up to, in every area of my life. And, this is the progress that I want to make in the next 3 months toward that. I didn't make this stuff up. It's a journal that I bought. And a coach that I hired sent me the journal. So, right. I just decided to use the tool I was given. And it's working for me. So to me, it's that. And then, reminding myself about, what's my life about? Who am I? I'm about making a difference. My values are integrity, growth, and joy. And I got to be doing things that fulfill that for me all day, every day. And on the days that I don't do it, then I got to figure out how to adjust so that the next day I can make more progress toward integrity, growth, and joy. Yeah.
Wow, I think that's some amazing advice. Back to the beginning, recognition is so important for people who, like you said, just getting the meeting or deals won, sharing the success stories. How did you do it? Walk the team through it. From the initial contact, let's go through this. And then, most people really like to share those wins.
They do.
And it gives them recognition, encouragement. It also, helps educate, or it helps the other team members understand maybe different things that they might be able to do. And then I really like what you said about motivation being tied to energy levels. It's so funny. Like I can never be a venture capitalist because I'm too optimistic. I would invest in everything. I think everything's going to be amazing, right? and I'm just like way just hopelessly optimistic, almost in everything. But there'll be days where I'll be just like, oh, it's not going to work. This is no good. And I'm like, what is going on? And then I realize I'm exhausted. I got 3 hours of sleep. I've been doing that for 2 or 3 days in a row. I'm not eating right, not getting the exercise. Something's missing there. And then I got to take a step back and say, okay, this is not real. These are just my feelings are real, but the thoughts that are interpreting these feelings, I need to kind of think about this, recognize that, get the rest, eat right, do the exercise. And It's amazing. I can turn it around typically within a day, just actually by just recognizing it, slowing down, is hugely important. The meditation. So I've dabbled with it. But what I'll do is I'll typically 3 or 4 times throughout the day, take a 15, 20 minute walk, or just something, just get away from the devices, the computers, whatever, and do something that's kind of relaxing. Tell me, like, how did you learn how to meditate? And you said you use an app, because it seems incredibly simple. Just don't think about stuff, but it can be hard because, our brains, I'm counting my breaths, I'm doing this. And all of a sudden my mind's like, oh, but don't forget about what you got to call that person. You got to do that thing, So yeah, talk a little bit about it.
Well, I've kind of learned how to meditate over the years, Mark, and it's just like anything. It's just you just practice. And, look, we didn't, when we were young kids, we didn't like go out on a sport field and begin to play a game and expect to be like, a rock star
Fair
the
enough.
very moment we touched the field or the ball, right?
Right.
So we've got to give ourselves some grace here when we're learning how to do something new, that it's going to be a learning and it's going to be a little uncomfortable, and let go of the judgment of it. There's not a wrong way to meditate.
I like that.
Right? Like you can't screw it up. It's impossible because the goal of it is to like unplug, resettle yourself, get your energy from feeling scattered, get yourself from feeling like kind of overwhelmed or frantic or whatever is kind of going on for you, which frequently happens to me. And to kind of like get grounded and be like, okay, now I can focus again and have perspective and, get a plan and start executing it. But that pause, I really began learning to do that. I downloaded an app that is like, there's like 4 apps that I couldn't live without on my phone. And I'll tell you, Instagram is not one of them.
Okay.
I'm not, but this one is, it's called Insight Timer, and there's other ones out there. And, I started to do guided meditations, and like listening to someone walk you through what to do helps. And then I did last summer, set a goal. I was like, okay, it was a question. I wonder if I can meditate without the guide. I was curious. So I was like, I wonder if I can try 20 minutes. And so I set a little timer on my phone, and I just like laid down and closed my eyes and did my breathing that I'd learned how to do, all these other practices that I'd tried. And it turned out that I could. And there's sometimes I can get fully, totally fully, totally calmed and like no thought happening. But so what if you have a thought? Like, who cares? All you do is say, okay, I'm thinking about something, big deal. Like breathe.
Let it go, right?
Like let it go, surrender a little bit. Like, don't judge yourself so much. It's okay. Like, you're just meditating. You wouldn't be judging yourself if you were going for a walk.
No, but you're so right about that. It's so funny because my mind will start racing about something, and then I would be like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Because I'm pretty competitive. Like, no matter what I'm doing, I want to do it well, right? And it's like, but like, I like the analogy of going for a walk. I don't compete when I go for a walk. Okay, I just look at the trees, the flowers, and be like, hey, that's kind of cool. I like that. Yeah. So, well, the other thing you mentioned was the journaling, and I kind of a subset of that. I was reading Tim Ferriss's Tool of the Titans. He has this jar of awesome. And anytime something good happens or once or, whatever, he'll write it down and put it in a jar. And whenever he's feeling like, hey, I'm not doing well, blah, blah, he pulls out the jar of awesome and he goes, oh my God, look at all this stuff that I did that I forgot about, right? Because sometimes we tend to focus on what's not going right versus
oh my gosh.
what. Yeah.
That's the human brain right there. The human brain is like looking for problems all the time, right? We're trained as evolution to look for danger.
No, that's true. And then in the way our media delivers information, it's all about what's going wrong with the world versus, So I guess that's part of it. But hey, Amy, you also, as we mentioned earlier, you do a podcast. It's the Women in Sales Leadership Podcast. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, some of the guests you've had on, what you talk about. I guess it's sales leadership, but in your words.
Thank you for asking. This was like a passion project of mine that evolved over the summer. And it's interesting, Mark, like when podcasting became a thing, like 10 years ago, I had this like, random fantasy that I would have a podcast someday. And I was like, then like the voice of like, no came on. It was like, well, what would it be about? And who would listen to it? And all this like naysaying stuff that I talked myself out of doing it. Well, last summer I decided that I would. So, I hired a coach, and, which is, a path I've learned to take, is I hire people to help me now. I've decided I can't just solve every problem by myself. So I hired a coach, and we came up with a podcast, and she said, what do you want it to be about? And I said, I want it to be about women in sales leadership. And so that's the podcast of what it's called. I launched that in September and about to, put up episodes 9 and 10.
In 3 months, 2 months. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've got guests that are amazing. I think one of the most fun things about having the show is that I get to meet these absolutely amazing women leaders and get to A, get to know them, and B, hear their story and be a part of sharing it with listeners. And I've talked to everybody from first line leaders inside tech companies. I've talked to presidents of huge brokerage firms that are in residential real estate. And I've talked to SVPs of big tech companies that everybody knows. So really it's an opportunity to hear these leaders talk about their journey, and share some of the things that they've learned along the way. And what inspired me to create the show was the stark realization that what's exciting is that in the field of sales, there's been a lot of progress made. There are about half of the sellers out there in the world are female, which is great. When it comes to sales leadership, however, only 30% of sales leaders are women. And I think there's just tremendous opportunity to invite more women to the table and empower them to step up and to show them all of these great role models of female leaders who have taken the leap. They've, felt or heard the call of leadership, and they decided to, step out on a ledge and say, what, I'm going to go for it. And they did. And so it's exciting for me to get to share those stories. And it's an honor to get to know these ladies and put it out there for people to enjoy.
That's really awesome. And I think very important, because a lot of times if somebody doesn't see somebody like themselves in a position that they aspire to be in, it's hard for them to believe that there's a path for that. And if you are somebody who's, reached that position and you can share your lessons learned and, and you create that kind of community, I would think is super, super helpful. That's awesome. Last question. I want to go back to the very beginning. I asked you, the differences and the motivations of working, it's just all in for one company versus in a fractional role, right?
Yeah.
And now you're working in a fractional role. Maybe a couple different organizations. I'm not sure. Maybe can you talk a little bit about your reasons for doing that and the pros and cons of the former versus the latter? Yeah,
sure. So, thank you for asking about that. The reason that I chose to go that way, Mark, is that along my journey, after 25 years of doing this stuff, in some big companies, I look back, and I thought, when was I happiest? And when did I feel like I was really so fulfilled by what I was doing? And the answer to that for me was when I was really building teams from the ground up and helping shape strategy for companies. And it turns out, I've learned a few things along the way, and I have a lot to offer and share. And, I didn't even know what fractional sales leadership was, I didn't even know what that was until I had a friend, that I know that went into that world, and I began to learn about it. I thought, well, gosh, this sounds like exactly what I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be able to come in, help companies really design their go-to-market strategy and not just have it be an idea that sits on the shelf, but have it be a real actionable playbook that helps them establish themselves as a real going concern, whether they're Series A funding level or beyond. Being able to put all the things in place that have to be there in order to demonstrate credibility to customers, credibility to investors, that we can reliably hit our forecasts, make our numbers, have the playbooks, have the right talent, have the right process to do so, and create value for everybody that's involved in the company. So those are all the things that kind of really, they line up to my values, right? Integrity, growth, and joy. And those things really are fun for me. And so I am working with the company that you and I got connected through right now. And then I also coach individuals as a side business for myself. I find that there are a number of individuals that really are still missing that leadership coaching for themselves. And it's a big component of what I did as a leader that I most loved and enjoyed was connecting with individuals, learning about their strengths, helping them grow and develop in their strengths, and also, figure out tools to deal with the things they're not good at, right? and continue to grow and evolve. So when I talk about, you asked me about pros and cons. I mean, I guess there's some obvious ones, right? Like I'm doing fractional stuff. I'm not like only thinking about one company at a time. My brain likes that. It may not be for everybody. I love multiple complex things going at once. I feel like that helps me in my development and growth and my vitality and quite frankly, my creativity, because, what you learn in one space can sometimes be applied to another company, and, or there's derivatives of connection that you can find between the two to help growth across.
I agree with everything you're saying there, and it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of times it comes down to figuring out what you're looking for in your life, and integrity, growth, and joy. And if you get that from working with multiple companies, and you get that stimulation, and you're helping them create something, I mean, I think there's nothing really more rewarding than helping somebody to develop themselves. Which actually, if you think about sales, you're helping a customer solve a problem. It feels fun when it works. It's great. When did you realize that, hey, because you obviously have a lot of knowledge and experience, and you can bring a lot of value to, large organizations or these smaller organizations you're helping with. You can coach individuals. You can bring value. Did you have like an aha moment when you realized, hey, you know what, I can actually share this? And before you answer that, because I remember, specifically having lunch with a business owner, and we were just having lunch, and I actually, it was like a friends had introduced us, but I wasn't like there to do any business. And we start talking about his background, my background. And he said, we could really use you to come in and coach our teams. And I was like, me? And so we actually, worked out an engagement model. And it was a very successful engagement. And that led me to launching my own consulting practice in 2012, which is a whole other story. But the point is I wasn't thinking about it before. I had to have somebody kind of like serve it up to me. For you, when did you have an aha moment that, I can bring value to not just this organization, but maybe many different types of organizations?
Yeah, it was probably a moment that occurred over a couple of months, really. And I'll tell you, what led me to this spot, Mark, is that, I have no secrets. I worked with Salesforce, and I was one of 10,000 people that they laid off in early 2023. And it was probably one of the best things that could have happened to me. I'd never been laid off before. But I was able to have some time, as a result of that, to really evaluate, like, what did I want to do with my career? Because up until then, I'd kind of just I just sort of gotten lucky, I have to say, right? There wasn't a real design or a deliberate approach of anything I did. So, maybe that's, but other people can identify with that. And having to have that time gave me perspective about what did I want for myself in my life. And, I've got 2 teenage kids. 14 and 15 years old. I have a very limited amount of time left with them being, in my life on a regular basis. They're going to go off and get out of the nest at some point, I do hope. And, in order to get to where I have been, I had to sacrifice a lot along the way. And one of the sacrifices that I made was not having enough time with my children that I would have loved to have had. And, I began to think about, okay, I could go back and do another corporate gig. My heart couldn't get excited about doing another corporate gig. And not to say that that's out of the picture for me, because you know what? You never know. And I always like to keep all options open. But what began to open up for me over the course of a couple months was wow, what if I really could go do what I'd wanted to do 20 years ago, which is to then consult and help companies and be this, helper that creates real value, helps them get their sales organization ready to rock, and in a way that they can go to their investors and say, we are delivering the goods and we have all the tools and talent to deliver the goods. And I like that constant churn of new things to work on and new things to do. It stimulates my brain. And so I really had to just give myself permission to stop looking for a corporate job. And I knew I had the credibility. I knew I have the track record. I know I can do it. I had to just give myself permission to do it. And then I did what everybody says you got to do when you're doing something. I went and told everybody I knew this is what I'm doing. So then I had to be accountable to do it. And now I am.
And you've done it. Hey. So no, I mean, you obviously have, like I said, a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience and wisdom to share. One of the reasons I love doing podcasts is I get to meet people like you and I get to learn a lot. I always take notes, and I took a bunch of notes and that things that I will follow up with personally, to kind of add to my knowledge base as well afterwards. But Amy, I really appreciate you coming on the Grow Fast podcast. And I would like to wish you and, all the different ventures you're involved with the greatest success and an amazing end to 2024.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Right back at you, Mark. What a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Cheers.